Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're doing really well, and I hope you all had a good lunch, and you're not too sleepy right now, especially in these comfy seats at the front. I'm very envious, if I'm honest. A huge thanks to Visit Oulu and Business Oulu for inviting me along to speak with you guys today. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here in Oulu and experience what proper winter is all about, because this is not the kind of winter that we get in Manchester, where I'm from. Going to talk to you today a little bit about seasonality and my particular approach to seasonality. And we're going to do that through, now this is either good news or bad news. If you like data, it's good news. If you don't like data, I'll try and make it fun and interesting as best I can. But we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive as to where holistically the tourism industry is at. Because it's my belief that we really, to understand our own situation, wherever we are in Oulu or in Manchester or in Ibiza or anywhere else, we need to understand the global picture of tourism and what's going on, and then we can understand where the opportunities are for our destinations. So that's what we're going to do. We'll go through it as best we can with all of the different data. So first of all, who am I? Because none of you know who I am, and why would you, by the way? I've basically been in the travel and tourism industry since I left school. So one of my first jobs was as a travel agent at Thomas Cook, if any of you are familiar with that particular travel agency brand. And I fell into it by accident. I hadn't planned to be in the travel and tourism industry. But once I got into Thomas Cook and I was selling holidays to people, I found it immensely exciting because usually in any given year, the single biggest expense that anybody has, assuming they're not buying a car or a house, is their vacation, their annual vacation. And the fact that they were, allowing me the opportunity to help them spend their money and choose and create their trips, I thought was immensely exciting. And I also realized that, it was a big world, and the world had more to it than my upbringing in Manchester. And I wanted to discover as much of the world as I possibly could. I wanted to discover different cultures and peoples and understand how people live, knowing that they live differently to how we live. And I figured that if I wanted to experience this world and travel around a lot and experience as much as I could, I'm either going to have to be relatively wealthy or I need to get somebody else to pick up the ticket. And in the travel and tourism industry, I figured that's the way to do it, definitely. You can get to experience the world and hopefully somebody else will pick up the ticket. So that's being very honest about it. I worked my way up through Thomas Cook and had senior management positions at organizations like tour operators like Kuoni, and then later the My Travel Group. And at this stage then I'd figured, I want to stay in travel and tourism. I'm absolutely loving this, and I want to expose myself to as many areas of this industry as I possibly could because it fascinated me. And eventually, I came to an organization known as Roots. For any of you that don't know, Roots is a series of events where the world's airline network planners and airports from all over the world get together to discuss and agree new air services. I found it tremendously fascinating. It's a side of the industry I had no idea existed. I don't know how I thought route development happened. But to think that all these airlines and airports gather in one place every year to have these conversations, I thought was fascinating. I worked there for about 10 years on the senior management team. And one of the more interesting points about that was that up until that point, the tourism industry, for me, had meant the UK outbound tourism industry. So whenever anybody said to me, the tourism industry is looking good this year, or it's looking bad next year, what they meant was the UK outbound tourism industry. And what I realized at Roots is all of a sudden you're looking at the whole world, and you're seeing that the tourism industry is Thailand inbound, Thailand outbound, Oulu outbound, Oulu inbound. It's just absolutely colossal. And you start to figure, okay, we're a part of something much bigger. And I think I need to try and understand a little bit more about the bigger picture to understand how that UK outbound bit or UK inbound bit fits into the whole thing. So that was an interesting step in the direction. A little bit more then about me. After I'd been at those particular organizations, I then founded Low Season Traveller, which is focused on the low seasons, naturally, because it's the best time of the year to travel, definitely. No crowds, no chaos, love it. I'm also on the board of the World Tourism Association for Culture and Heritage, and I was one of the founding directors of that organization, working with Chris Flynn. I also published some magazines, Low Season Traveller magazines. I'm putting them down. They're brilliant. You should read them. Little bit more about me, because obviously there's the professional me, and then there's the personal life me. I love sauna, and I'm here in the home of sauna. I start and end every day with a sauna, and have done for the past 15 years. And I can't believe it's taken me this long to get to Finland. And I absolutely love and live by the sauna. I love my family. That should have been first, sorry. I love my family, naturally, and I've got two daughters at home. I love tennis, animals, music, culture. I really love culture. But I guess I'm more defined by what I dislike, bizarrely. That's what motivates me, because I hate crowds. Love people, I just hate crowds. I don't like stress. I don't like chaos. I like calm. I like chilled out. And I don't like cruelty of any nature whatsoever. So broadly speaking, I'm a lover, not a fighter, I'd say would be the best way to put it. In 2018, my life changed significantly. I'm making it sound very grand, I know. But it was an interesting time because my father had died about 1 year before, in the October 2017. And 1 year to the day, bizarrely, I woke up and I went on LinkedIn, as you do, and I found a quote that came up on LinkedIn. And for some reason, it really spoke to me, and I thought it's beyond a coincidence that it's a day since my father died, and I'd struggled with that. And this quote's hit me, and I'm applying it to my personal life, and then I'm applying it to tourism as well. And this is what the quote is. If you want to know your past, you need to examine your present conditions. If you want to know your future, you need to examine your present actions. And I thought, that really speaks to me. So I wanted to then have a look on the tourism side. I wanted to understand, okay, what's going on right now so I can understand how we got there, and then maybe that should influence what we do in the future. Kind of made a logical sense. And so, examining the present conditions. And this is what I was doing in 2018, just after I'd left Roots, actually. And this is what I was seeing. I was seeing images like this. If you can, hopefully you can see it because there's massive screens everywhere. This is actually the Masai Mara. Now, this particular image was taken about 8 weeks ago by a friend of mine who's on the ground in the Masai Mara. And unfortunately, the format of this photo didn't fit with the slides because it goes on and on and on. It's really quite a long one. And it's just crowds of vehicles, which all run on diesel, by the way, in this beautiful wilderness, watching the great wildebeest migration. And by the way, when I look, I'm going to show you a few images like this, but this is the stuff that we're seeing, this, mass kind of tourism. But when you're looking at these photos, I'd like you to consider, what did the people imagine that experience was like before they got there? When they went to the travel agent, to Ged at Thomas Cook, however many years ago, and they were parting with their £15,000, what's the experience that they thought they were getting? Is it that, being honest? I would suggest possibly not. This is Angkor Wat, if any of you are familiar with it, in Cambodia. Another incredible piece of cultural heritage. Obviously, quite a few people there these days as well. Rome, never been to Rome. If that's the experience, it's not for me, if I'm honest. The Colosseum looks fabulous, but that experience, that's more or less my idea of hell. Until I'd seen this picture, which definitely is my idea of hell. This is a beach in Salou, in northern Spain, the Mediterranean, in the summer season. Glorious, eh? Glorious. Las Ramblas, if anybody recognizes it, in Barcelona. Again, famously been suffering from extreme peaks of mass tourism. Santorini here, if anybody, again, is recognizing these images. This one always makes me think, and similar with the Barcelona one, is all of these people here that take it over for about 6 months of the year. What's it like to live there? What's it like if one of those houses is your house and that's your home? I don't know, it just doesn't kind of sit right with me, to be honest. This is, anybody recognize it? Nobody's going to say it. Somebody does. It's Maya Bay in Thailand. Famously, it had to close down for a period of 2 years in, I think it was about 2018, 2019, because the destruction of the area was so bad that the nature was just getting eradicated. So they had to close it down for 2 years. And actually, it's a success story because since they've reopened it, they've changed now the way in which tourism works there. You have to basically go on a special trip actually out there, and it's very limited in terms of the numbers. And you can't swim in the sea at that bay at all now because a lot of sharks, there's like shark nurseries there for young sharks, and they've started to come back since they reopened it. So there's no swimming there as well. So it's quite a success story. And now the pictures that the tourists will be getting when they go there will actually be the pristine beauty of the place, if that floats their boat. This one, you may or may not be able to make it out, a very famous painting, the Mona Lisa. Again, I really, why? I don't know why you would want to go and see it if you're going to be, what, about 50 people behind the picture. The other thing that interests me on this is if you can see at the side, over on that side, there's some incredible paintings on the wall. And I really feel sorry for the artists who have got their paintings there, because no one's going to look at it at all. For me, you may as well just lock the Mona Lisa in its own room and let all the crowds just go there and then stick the rest of the painting somewhere else. So yeah, all of this is what I was seeing in 2018, and it's still present today. And it was, the term being used again and again was the term overtourism. Now, I absolutely can't stand the expression overtourism. And yet sometimes we have to use it because it just kind of adequately sums up what we mean. But the reason that I don't like the word over-tourism is because over-tourism, well, for anything to be over or under something requires a point of reference. Do we agree on that? I think we do, loosely. So I know for a fact that I'm overweight. How do I know that? Well, the experts, the medical experts, have prescribed that for a man of my height and my build, I guess, and my lifestyle, that there is a certain range which is deemed to be optimum, healthy, I guess. And if I'm within that range, then all good. If I'm under that range, then I'm underweight. If I'm over that range, then I'm overweight. Okay, so when we're talking about over-tourism, the biggest challenge with that word is, what's the point of reference? What's the optimum? And for the most part, there isn't one. Because I, over the period of my career, have been speaking with ministers for tourism and such like in a lot of the island destinations, and I've asked them a very simple question. Well, I thought it was, which is, what is the capacity for your destination? What's the infrastructure built for? What's the road system built for? The taxis, the sewage, the garbage disposal? What's the number that it's built for on any given day or any given year? And usually they didn't have an answer for that. So then the question is, well, why are you just attracting more and more all the time if you don't know what the limit is? That's got to be irresponsible, surely. So I don't like the expression over-tourism. So still examining the present conditions, what is the data telling us? And again, I always look at the anecdotal stuff of what's on in the news, and then I look at the hard data. Hopefully, again, you can read some of these slides. All of these particular slides are from the United Nations Tourism Organization. So they produce a barometer, tourism barometer every year. And it's a great document, and you can download it. There's links on there. But in 2019, the results were 1.5 billion international arrivals. And we pause there for a second to try and understand, do we know what the difference between a million and a billion is? Because I don't deal in millions and billions. Maybe you guys do. I don't know if anybody's relatively wealthy. But I always like to try and break it down so we can understand truly what we're talking about when we're mentioning these vast numbers. If you were to go back 1 million seconds from right now, you'd be about 12 and a half days in the past. If you were to go back 1 billion seconds from right now, you'd be somewhere in the mid-1990s. The difference between a million and a billion is absolutely colossal. And when we talk about a billion this or a billion that, it is a monstrously big number. And I just want you to hold that in mind as we go through the presentation further on. So we saw 1.5 billion international arrivals in 2019. And the United Nations Tourism Organization, I was at a webinar in the January of 2020, just pre-pandemic. And they said it's been the best year for tourism. And I was like, I'm not sure I'm seeing that, to be honest, because I'm seeing the images that you just saw before, and I'm like, how is that the best year for tourism? But of course, there was one metric that they were using to define best, which was number of visitors. If the number of visitors is higher than last year, then hey, it's all good, right? That's effectively what they were saying. Really blunt instrument of measurement, and I get why it's used very often for historic reasons, and also you need to have some point of reference, and last year's was X and this year's is Y. But yeah, is that the right metric we should be using? I don't know. I don't think it is, to be honest. Our trajectory, well, this again was done in the same presentation in January 2019, and this is the United Nations World Tourism Organization. And they were showing a slide which showed that we were basically way over the target. We were where their own predictions were due to be. So we were like, 5 years ahead of where we should have been. So they were predicting, I think by 2030, 1.8 billion international tourists around the world. And it was really evident. If you just extrapolated the graph which they showed in the presentation, you could see that we were trending way, way, way over that. 300 million over, and increasing all of the time. And again, that's just getting my heckles up. I'm thinking, there's something going wrong here in a big way. So yeah, we're on track to exceed 2 billion by 2030. So yeah, tourism looked to me to be very much out of control when I was examining the present conditions. This is, by the way, a screenshot of the film The Last Tourist. Has anybody seen The Last Tourist? Nobody. Nobody. It might not be on Netflix in Finland. If you could search it out on YouTube, I highly recommend it. It's one of those Netflix-style documentaries where they really scrape underneath the surface of the global travel and tourism industry. And it's a really interesting program. It's a very important program, I believe, and well worth researching. So what was that leading to? Well, it was leading to stuff like this. We were starting to see a bit of an eradication of, not an eradication, but a sort of destruction of cultural heritage around the world. And you were seeing scenes like this as well, which is obviously, this is Egyptian, it's in Luxor, actually, in the Valley of the Kings. And you're seeing, it's graffiti, effectively. It's Chinese graffiti. Again, mindless stuff. This stuff's kind of over 7,000 years old. This was a statue where the thumb had been removed by a tourist. And what this is all indicative of is we're in a culture at the moment where everything's fast fashion, fast food, basically mass produce and sell really cheap. And we've been doing the same in travel and tourism for a lot of years now. So, I always say, when my daughters say to me in, 2040, when I'm, Christ knows how old, I can't do the maths, and they're saying, Dad, were you aware that things were going really off the rails? You were in travel and tourism. Were you aware of this? It'll be hard for me to say no when I'll have to say to them, well, look, to be honest with you girls, you could go to Rome from Manchester for the price of a pizza. It's that cheapening of the experience that I think then leads to, well, anybody can go. So nobody then values it. If you're spending 25 quid to go to Rome for a weekend, how much value are you putting on that? Are you really planning that trip? Are you really thinking about the culture, the cultural exchange on that trip? Or are you just thinking, excuse my language, fuck it, it's 25 quid, may as well do it for the weekend because I'm a bit bored. That's where this is kind of leading to, I think. This was horrendous. Don't know if anybody saw this. This happened, I laugh, I shouldn't. It was in 2019. But again, it was a very major cruise company. And they decided, this is when they're in New Zealand, so they've got passengers getting off in New Zealand, and they wanted to introduce a cultural bit, as you do. And they decided, rather than actually, engage with the Maori community, which is what you would naturally do, they decided to put blackface on members of the crew and say to them, do some kind of a dance a bit like a haka to, make it feel like it's legitimate. Absolutely awful. And it got to the stage where even the last gasp dying daubs of the local people became a tourist attraction in themselves. People are actually then having the photo taken with the graffiti from the locals saying, look, tourists, you're not welcome here. We've had enough. We've got too much. So then you need to examine the effect of our present actions. And you look again at what the data is telling you. And this is current now. So I've recently gotten into Google Trends. Does anybody look at Google Trends or use this tool at all? If you do at the back, thank you for that, thank you. If you don't, really give it a go. It's a fascinating tool, it's free of charge. You put in a search term, and it will tell you how much that search term has been used or how often it's been used on the web over any given period. And I put in the term overtourism, and it was just quite intriguing because I have got a pointer on this, have I? I have. Oh, yeah, I was going to race over and show you instead. But this mark here, so what it's showing you, if you can't read it, is that was the highest number of incidences of the word overtourism that there had ever been up until that point, and that's 2019, just pre-pandemic. And if you can recall, it was pretty bad at that stage. Now, twice that. So now it's a new high, and it's twice the number of incidences of the expression overtourism being used on the web since 2019. That's telling us something. We're back on track. Back on track to the good old days. This is again from the UNWTO Tourism Barometer, and it's just basically telling us that we've recovered. It's not easy to read particularly. The only one which is lagging behind is Asia Pacific, and that's mainly China, which has been a bit slow on the recovery, but they are coming back now. Right, a little bit of a word on what's going on in aviation. I'm always really conscious that aviation and tourism, whilst they're in the travel industry together, usually they're a different language. Aviation people not necessarily going to understand all of the different nuances of global tourism, and certainly tourism people definitely do not understand the different nuances of aviation. So I always like to look at the aviation data because the airline guys, they really know their stuff and they go for data in a big way. Since 2019, 42 new airports have been basically opened. That's incredible, no? 42 new airports since 2019. So while we were all in COVID, this is what's been going on behind the scenes. 160 new airlines, 160, 43 new runways, 7,250 new routes opened, all since 2019. Aviation proves itself resilient. All of the figures that I'm giving you here, by the way, are from the Boeing and Airbus global market forecast reports, which they do all the time. These guys predict 20 years in advance, so they have a plan for the next 20 years. How many of you here operate 20 years in advance and have a rough plan for your business or anything for the next 20 years? Not many of us do. In aviation, they do it all the time. So aviation, again, there's been the huge dip from COVID, but we're pretty much back on track. This is just showing us that aviation has pretty much recovered at this stage to the pre-COVID levels. And this was an interesting one. So this one was from I think it's from the Airbus report. And again, you can download these reports. They're freely available for anybody. But they're saying that the market, and both Boeing and Airbus agree on this, the market for new aircraft is 42,430 new aircraft between 2024 and 2043. So they're planning for another 42,000 aircraft. And that's in addition to the ones we've got. That's taking into consideration retirement of old aircraft and stuff like that. This is new additional aircraft going on in the world. And yeah, when they predict the future 20 years out, they usually get it right. They usually bang on the money. This is an interesting one. This is from Boeing, and it's telling you in the yellow column there, it's telling you their delivery forecast when they predicted it in 2004, and then it's telling you what the deliveries were between that period. More or less bang on the money for a 20-year forecast. It's quite incredible. So when they tell us that the world's aircraft fleet is going to double in the coming 20 years, we'd better bloody listen to them, to be honest, because they know what they're talking about. And we need to take notice, and we need to figure out what does that mean for me in Manchester and for you in Oulu. What does it mean for global tourism? What does it mean for the psyche of world tourists and travelers? What's going to drive the growth? A study, this was from McKinsey Group, a study said that 84% of travelers are going to be prioritizing travel in their budget. 86% will travel more than they did pre-pandemic. Trip lengths will be longer. I think that's generally a good thing than before 2020. And again, you look at the bigger picture and look at the macroeconomics. And what we can see, there's all kinds of figures here, the urban population, the global population. We know we're over 8 billion people now in the world. But what we are seeing is a global middle class of plus 1.7 billion. Now that's a really scary one. I mean, it's a good one because it means that we're elevating people out of poverty and into relative wealth. And when we say middle class, what we mean by that is that they have got their own house, they've got a vehicle, they've got kids in education, and they've got disposable income. For the first time, they've got disposable income. And what we find is that usually when people achieve middle-class status, quite rightly, they want to travel and explore the world and see what all the fuss is about in Italy or wherever else. And it's going to grow by 1.7 billion in the coming years. And that's a big number, as I mentioned earlier on the difference between a million and a billion. Most of the growth is coming from Asia and the Pacific region. You would be shocked to realize. And what it condenses down to is another 1 billion by 2028. 1 billion more on the global middle class by 2028. And they're already on their way. They're already coming. Most of them are coming from Asia. This, you can see here, it's 380 million will come from India. 350 million will come from China. But overall, most of the next 1 billion entrants to the global middle class will come from Asia and the Pacific region. And they will spend on travel. This one blew my mind when I first saw it. 10.5 million Chinese-made trips in the year 2000. And it had already increased in 2019 to 155 million. That's a huge amount more than we had in 2000. It's widely predicted to exceed 350 million by 2030. These are huge increases, and they're coming. It's happening. So in 2019, we had 1.5 billion international arrivals around the world. And it had taken us roughly 100 years, more or less, from the starts of tourism all the way up to 1.5 billion in 2019. And what we're saying is that in the next sort of 6 to 10 years, we're going to get another 1 billion. Basically, we're going to double global arrivals in the next sort of 10 to 15 years. And that's the bit that got me thinking, you know, why aren't people talking about this? This is absolutely real. This is absolutely going to happen. So that over-tourism stuff that we saw in 2019, that's a walk in the park compared to what's coming down the line. And the reason that I say all of this and show you these facts and these figures, which are freely available, is you've got to start thinking on the mindset of how people are going to change as a result of this. So when you see when enough people in their summer are going to Barcelona and Dubrovnik and they're experiencing crammed conditions, what's their thought going to be afterwards? They've paid £5,000 or whatever for their holiday. What's their thought going to be? Their thought is going to be, Jesus, I'm not doing that again. I want to go somewhere quieter. I need to get away from the crowds. That's where the opportunity is. If you've got a destination that doesn't really have much in the way of over-tourism at all, and if you've got a kind of a destination that's a little bit quieter, maybe it could be a peaceful haven. So maybe what you've got here in Oulu, maybe it's a peaceful haven for people that are just looking to get away from the madness of the world. So, you know, yeah, they're coming. The question is, are we ready for them? And it's a big question. And the question I asked back in sort of 2018 when I was looking at all of this data and these facts and these figures, and it was racing around in my mind. And I'm just thinking, how can we safely accommodate more visitors, but do it in a way that doesn't disrupt the local people in each destination, but also the environment as well? And I recognize that we do have to grow because many destinations' economies are built on a visitor economy. You know, tourism it's hugely powerful. It does a huge amount for different destinations. So I do think tourism is a force for good, shall we say. But we need to manage it a little bit better, I think. One of the ways which I came up with, make it sound very grand, don't I? Anybody came up with. But you know, one of the things that you can look at is, okay, we can increase prices, and that's going to then deter some visitors from coming. And I was really against this early on in 2018. I've actually changed my position on it now. I'm actually thinking this is probably not a bad idea because I think we've gone so far down the low-cost schema on tourism that I think that the tourism products that we've got are worth a little bit more than 30 euros or whatever it is. What I'm against is tourism taxes. So they've done it in Venice. I think many of you will be aware of that. I think it's up to about 10 euros a day now if you want to enter Venice and you have to pay this local tax. That's not going to reduce tourism numbers at all, and it's been proven it hasn't. In fact, in no place where they've introduced the tourism tax has it reduced the number of visitors. Quite the opposite, it's increased the number of visitors. So clearly, that's not working. My other concern with it is that maybe, I sort of thought originally that maybe we're returning to the realms of tourism going to the realms of the relatively wealthy, so only relatively wealthy people could travel. And that filled me with fear because my daughters aren't from a wealthy background, unfortunately for them, which would mean that maybe they and their kids wouldn't be able to travel as well as I traveled and experience the world as I had experienced it. So I was against that. Creating new resorts and hotels. I have a really big problem with this. And this is just an example of a new resort which has opened up in Mexico. But for me, until you've proven that you can fill the hotels that you've got all year round, I'm really against building new hotels. Because what you've got in most destinations, because most destinations are seasonal, is you've got hotels that are pretty much full for 6 months of the year, there or thereabouts, and then practically empty for 6 months of the year, there or thereabouts. And that's really, it's a sustainability issue as well as anything else, because research has shown me that the built environment accounts for, depending on the source, anything between 15 and 25% of all global emissions. So building stuff is creating a huge amount of global emissions. So before we build new hotels, I think we should fill the ones that we've got first. I mean, that has to be the most sustainable thing, surely. We might have a marketing challenge at different times of the year, but it is exactly that. It's a marketing challenge because every destination has value at any time of the year, but we have to find it, and we have to research it, and we have to promote it. Or the other alternative is promote the unique experiences of the quiet times. And obviously, I'm a big proponent of this because I founded my company based on that, which is Low Season Traveller. I decided when I was looking at this, I was like, well, look, I'd rather go to a destination in their low season months because I don't like crowds and I don't like stress and I don't like paying over the odds for holidays and vacations. But also, most importantly, weather is not the most important factor for me traveling anywhere. The most important factor for me is meeting local people and experiencing different cultures and heritage. That's what drives me. That's what gets me excited. That's what gets me on the plane or the train or the car. So, this to me makes the most sense. And you know, who's the market appealable? That's not even a word. Appealing towards retiree travelers can travel at any time of the year. Dual income, no kids, sports travelers, cultural heritage travelers, people who value culture and heritage. Well, you know, the culture and heritage is there all year round. You know, if you want to go to Rome in January or in July, you know, the only difference is that in January there's going to be no queues of 3 hours. There's 3 hours to see the Colosseum in the peak season. There's no queues for 3 hours to see the Colosseum. You're going to be able to get reservations in restaurants, easy peasy, in January, whereas in July, you're probably not. In July, you're going to pay twice the price that you're going to pay in January. I guess the difference is in January, you need to bring a jacket. That's not a big deal for me because, I've got a coat, so it's no biggie. Attract tourists during the quieter months is obviously where I'm coming from. And the question that we get all the time is, who the hell would come here in our low season months? And it's this played out everywhere in the world. We work with tourism authorities all around the world, and it's who would come here? It rains in the low season months, or who would come here? It's too hot, or who would come here? It's too snowy, or whatever else. I've heard it all a million times before. And that's where you have to choose your niche really carefully. And there's a number of niches which are particularly appropriate for promoting low seasons, and you need to choose the ones which are the most appropriate for you. I've just listed out a few here. This is a non-exhaustive list. The ones I want to draw particular attention to, and I will in just one moment, are solo travelers. Cultural heritage tourism, obviously I'm a big proponent of cultural heritage tourism anyway, but there's a whole load more. Wildlife tourism, ancestry and genealogy tourism. Again, that's really big. I mean, ask anybody in Ireland how big that is. There's more Irish living outside of Ireland than there is within Ireland, in a big way. So you explore the niches which you feel are the most appropriate for your particular destination. And these are 3 niches or factors which I think are appropriate for you guys. Cultural heritage travelers, surprise, surprise. What are they seeking? History, art, native science and beliefs, unique lifestyle, adventure, the uniqueness of people. I always love that one. Unspoilt environments, authenticity. I would imagine you've got that here in Oulu by the bucket load. Some facts and figures. All sources are listed. From UN Tourism, 47% of global tourism has a cultural component. I would say they've under-egged that massively. I don't know where they got the figure from. I would say it's far higher than 47%. I think most destinations have probably got 80% cultural heritage. Oh, damn it, that's annoying, isn't it? The slide slipped off. It's 15% cultural tourism growth every year, according to World Bank and OECD. It's growing at 15%. Makes it one of the fastest growing tourism sectors that there is today. So again, probably a good one to be involved in. Increasing the average spend of cultural travelers. This was from the United States. They did a measurement. Obviously, they look at the money all the time, our American friends. And they noticed that cultural heritage travelers, there's a 60% increase when they're focused on cultural heritage. So these guys seem to spend more when they're in destination, which is probably a good thing. 75% visit destinations specifically for their culture. This was from a study from UNESCO. So again, people are looking for culture when they travel. 70% of travelers said they want more local and culturally immersive experiences. This is from booking.com. And 86% of young travelers stated experiencing new cultures when they were asked what gets them excited about travel in the future. So all roads leading down to culture, culture, culture. Solo travelers. Searches have doubled. So this again is using Google Trends. Searches have doubled since 2018 for the term solo travel. That's interesting. Shoulder hotel bookings are up 5% since 2019, and 70% of that increase is all from solo travelers. That's an interesting one. Also, solo travelers are spending 20% more on hotel bookings compared to 2019. So something's happening with regard to solo travelers, and they're clearly starting to come more to the fore, and therefore worth considering. So if you're a hotelier or a restaurateur or whatever else, think about how you can attract more for the solo travelers. I've always said at Low Season Traveller, we want to work with hoteliers that during the low season months are prepared to basically waive the single supplement. I mean, why have a single supplement? Your hotels are practically empty in the low season anyway. Why not do something good and say, hey, we're welcoming of low season travelers. We're not going to punish you for traveling on your own. We're actually going to say, no, you're fine. You're welcome. Come to us. So thinking about things like that. Skift Health Index points to solo travelers fueling low seasons. That was an article which just came out just this past week, which I thought was interesting. Climate change. Climate change is already starting to affect things. We're seeing that, in Europe, obviously in the Mediterranean region, it's getting hot down there in the summer. And we're seeing that it's still increasing in the arrivals. And this is from Forward Keys, by the way, which is a great data source on aviation data. But we're seeing that arrivals into Northern Europe are growing much quicker, which is very interesting. There you can see it more clearly. Northern Europe up 12% versus Southern Europe and the Med up 7%. So again, people are starting to shift more towards the Northern Hemisphere, where the climate actually is a lot more pleasant. Again, if your low season months, and I don't know, if your low season months were in the summer period and you're in the Northern Europe side of things, maybe there's an opportunity there for you, because it's probably going to get more so, I would imagine. Data-led insights are your friend. Just a few insights that we got here from some of our partners. This one is Data Appeal. And what they look at, their data sources are reviews. It's about sentiment. How are people feeling about the travel that they have? And what you'll see is the blue shaded area at the top, that wobbly bit there, that is roughly an indication of the number of visitors that are in the destination at that time. So where you can see the peak lump there, up there, that's when there was the most number of visitors in the destination. And the other one is the sentiment. And this one that I'm showing you, and I appreciate it's small and you can't read it, the blue line is the sentiment, which is pretty much flat. And what that tells you that for Finland overall, regardless of how busy things get in Finland, comparatively speaking, the sentiment is broadly the same, which is a good thing. It's a good thing. It's consistent. This is the seasonal balance in Oulu. And it's quite encouraging, really, because what it's telling us, and these guys at Data Appeal, they're just trying to work on a model now for seasonality. And it still needs tweaking. But what they're saying is that basically they've attributed, if it's 100%, then you're relatively flat seasonally. And if you're 0, you're really peaks and troughs. And Oulu is actually getting a little bit more flat already. So it's going in that direction, which is a good sign. This is an interesting one, the sentiment versus the volumes. And what you'll find loosely that you can see here is the sentiment, which is the single blue line, looks green actually. The sentiment, when that is at its peak, that's when the volume tends to be at the lowest. And when the volume of travelers in Oulu tends to be higher, it goes down. That actually makes sense to me, because I've spoken to hoteliers all around the world, and they always say that as you get closer to 100% occupancy, service levels tend to dip off. When you're lower on the occupancy, the service levels are better, because there's more, the staff to guest ratio is better. So it kind of makes sense, really. Seasonality-focused resources. I've got a report by Forward Keys, which is really good on understanding seasonality, and also one by Data Appeal. So if you want those, I can send them to you afterwards. What happens if we get it wrong? Anybody familiar with Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island, out there in the Pacific? And this is just one example. We've got stacks of these. Population, 8,000. Visitors in 2010, 50,000, which already is a huge amount versus the local population. In 2019, it was 156,000. And this is an island. There's only so much that they can take. And this is what happened, is, you've got fools messing around on these Moai statues, which are incredible and have been there for thousands of years. And people are just, jumping all over them, climbing on them, desecrating them, you could argue. But more worryingly is it led to 20 tons of garbage every single day on the islands that they hadn't prepared for or planned for, because they've built everything, waste disposal, garbage, for a population of 5,000. So all of a sudden, when you've got 156,000 in a year, obviously you have a lot of trash that goes with that. What that means, and this still happens, is there's daily garbage flights. They have to charter a full aircraft to bring 20 tons of garbage 2,500 miles from Rapa Nui to the mainland of Chile every single day. How utterly absurd is that, especially in the current climate, in every sense of the word? Yeah, it's absolutely horrendous. So we can't solve our problems with the same thinking that we used when we created them. We used to be incredible at long-term thinking. This is something which I'm very passionate about. Is anybody familiar with cathedral thinking? Nobody. One person is. YT is for sure, because he's seen me speak before. I'm a really big proponent of cathedral thinking. It's not something I came up with, but I'm just a very big proponent of it. And what it's about is, the whole notion is, it's asking yourself a question: what are you working on today that you personally will not benefit from, but that your grandchildren and great-grandchildren potentially will benefit from? So it's asking, what are you doing today that you will not benefit from, but others will? And it comes from the original European cathedral builders. Back in the day, it would take 150 to 200 years to build these immense cathedrals all over Europe. And you would have an architect who would design what the cathedral was going to look like, knowing he or she had to get it absolutely perfect. Because if they messed up on the plans, somewhere down the line, maybe even 2 generations down the line, they would run into problems. So you had to do it right, knowing as an architect, you're never going to see the final product. The people who dug and laid the first foundation stones, they had to get it perfect. Otherwise, there would be problems further down the line, and they were never going to see the end result. The glaziers, you name it, the roofers, most of them were not going to see the final result. But they did it diligently, and they worked exceptionally hard, because this was to be their gift for future generations. And this happened all over southern Europe, all over Europe generally. And there's an interesting story that it's down in Cambridgeshire in the UK. There was one of these cathedrals that ran into problems in the 80s, and this is well documented. It was about 1987, and the roof was held up by huge oak trusses and beams, and they'd started to rot. And this was a major problem, because they were like, where the hell are we going to get oak beams of that colossal stature to be able to replace them? I mean, this is a big issue. So they're racking their brains. It's, panic meetings left, right, and center, because it's an incredible piece of cultural heritage, this cathedral. And eventually, a farmer comes out, and he says, yeah, we in our family have been waiting generations for this moment. And everybody's saying, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And he said, well, yeah. 500-600 years ago, when the architects were designing the building, they knew what materials were going to be needed. And the first thing they did was they planted an oak forest on my land, because they knew that the oak that they were taking and they were going to use for the beams, they knew that that would only last maybe about 400 years before it might need replacing. So they planted a forest knowing that the lifespan of those beams was only so long, and then they would need replacing, and they knew that the oak forest on this farmer's land would have reached maturity by that stage when they would be needed. That's cathedral thinking. It's thinking way beyond your own lifetime. And that comes back to that point I raised earlier on when I was looking at the Airbus and the Boeing reports and saying these guys are looking 20 years in advance. How many of us are looking 20 years in advance in our own businesses? In my business, I'm not good enough at this stuff either. But we need to start looking further down the line, and we need to look beyond our own lifespan. And that's not always a comfortable thing to do. But that's why I'm a proponent of cathedral thinking. When you're making the journey towards any of the solutions, to operating in the low seasons and looking at different niches, my advice is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Good is good enough. Make a good start, and that's okay. And I only say that because I'm very much guilty of being a perfectionist, and sometimes I get paralyzed by fear because I'm not sure I can do it. And I need to remind myself, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just make a start, for Christ's sakes. Make a start, and that's okay. Making a start is okay. And that's all basically what was going through my mind as I formulated Low Season Traveller. Are you getting ready to kick me off? She's there with the chocolate, which is all good. I'm nearly at the end now, but that's what we do. We promote the low season experiences in destinations around the world. And this is just some of the quotes as well, which I kind of go by. When you follow the crowd, you lose yourself, but when you follow your soul, you lose the crowd. Eventually, your soul tribe will appear, but you mustn't fear the process of solitude. And that's when you're doing something different. It's a lonely road sometimes, and any entrepreneurs out there will know it is a lonely road. But eventually, if you know you're on the right lines, stick with it and don't be afraid of being on your own, even though it can be a scary place. And the person who follows the crowd will usually go no further than the crowd. The person who walks alone is likely to find themselves in places that no one has ever been before. And that's what we try to go for. That's me. I've got reports there which I can send you if you are interested in this stuff. But I want to thank you so much for your kind attention. And thank you again to Visit Oulu for the opportunity as well. Thank you.